Bio 2, we're continuing on learning more about our first animal group, the sponges, today. We ended with how they accomplish feeding last time, so now we're going to look at how they carry out respiration, circulation, and excretion. So sponges rely on the movement of water through their bodies to carry out body functions. So remember, they're stuck in one spot all the time, so they're going to have the movement of water to kind of help them carry out all their life functions. So oxygen is dissolved in the water, diffuses into the surrounding cells. So oxygen, as water's pumped through, the oxygen just kind of moves into the surrounding cells. CO2 and other waste, such as ammonia, diffuse into the water and are carried away. Remember, they're pumped out through that big opening known as the osculum. So response. So this is another kind of thing that sponges have to do to survive. So sponges do not have a nervous system that would allow them to respond to changes in their environment. So they don't necessarily have a brain or anything like that would help them respond to changes in their environment. However, they can protect themselves by producing toxins that make them unpalatable or poisonous to potential predators. So unpalatable is just a fancy way of saying they don't taste very good. So they can make toxins when the situation arises that would make them unpalatable or poisonous to potential predators. So that's kind of the limit to their response. They can't really do much other than that in terms of response. Reproduction, and that's another requirement again of living things. So sponges can reproduce sexually or asexually, and in most sponge species, a single sponge forms both eggs and sperm by meiosis. So they make their own sperm and their egg through meiosis, and the eggs are fertilized inside the sponge's body in a process called internal fertilization. So most sponges can either do it sexually or asexually. So when it is sexually, happens through a process called internal fertilization. So this is how when they do reproduce sexually, this is kind of how the process occurs. So the first step in the process is that sperm are going to be released from one sponge, and they're carried by water currents until they enter the pores of another sponge. So remember, they leave the osculum and they're going to flow through the pores of the side of another sponge. So once they make it to that other sponge, the archaeocytes, again, they kind of help move water through, they help move food, and now they're also going to help carry the sperm to an egg. So then after fertilization, the zygote develops into a larva, and a larva is just an immature stage of an organism that looks different from the adult form. So the larva is going to look nothing like the adult sponge. It's going to look completely different. However, eventually it will grow and develop into the adult sponge. So the larvae of sponges are motile, meaning they can in fact move, and then the water currents carry the larva until it attaches to a surface and grows into a new sponge. So then you can see here our final stage is the swimming larva gets carried, it lands on a spot, and then it grows into a mature sponge where it will stay for the rest of its life. So that is how they reproduce sexually. So they can reproduce asexually by a process of budding or producing what are known as gemmules. Gemmules is how I would pronounce that. In budding, part of a sponge will break off of the parent sponge, it settles to the seafloor, and grows to a new sponge. So that's pretty simple. So it's literally, and budding, if we would look over up on this picture, let's just pretend this larva is not there. We would just say this part on the left would break off, fall, and just grow into its own new sponge. That's how budding occurs. However, another way that they can reproduce is if difficult environmental conditions arise, some sponges will produce gemmules, which are groups of archaeocytes surrounded by a tough layer of spicules. So it's basically like a spore forming for an animal. It's like an animal spore is what it is. And they can survive freezing temperatures and drought, and when conditions become favorable, it will grow into a new sponge. So we've talked about how plants, their seeds can go dormant, and it's almost the same thing with a sponge. They can form these gemmules. It's almost like a seed or a spore. They can kind of survive a lot of harsh conditions. When the time's right, they will grow into a new sponge. And then sexual reproduction, again kind of going back, involves the joining of haploid gametes that have been produced by meiosis. And since the zygote contains genes from both parents, the new sponge is not going to be genetically identical to either parent. It's just like humans coming together and making a baby. The baby's not genetically identical to the mother or the father. It's a mix, and this can happen in sponges as well. However, in asexual reproduction, the exact opposite occurs. It does not involve meiosis or the joining of haploid gametes. Asexual reproduction produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. So the last portion of this video is going to focus on the ecology of sponges. So that's just the role they play in the environment with other living things. So they are very important in the aquatic ecology. They provide habitats for marine animals such as snails, sea stars, and shrimp. So sponges provide homes for a lot of other types of animals. And also they contain photosynthetic organisms that play an important role in the ecology and primary productivity of coral reefs. So without sponges, coral reefs really would not be able to form because they have organisms that help carry out photosynthesis that will kind of help us produce our coral reefs. And the spicules of some sponges look like cross-shaped antennae, so this is going to be kind of focused on how they actually do the photosynthesis. And so they focus their direct incoming sunlight to cells lying below the surface of the sponge where symbiotic organisms carry out photosynthesis. So the sponges actually have structures that will help them to carry out photosynthesis. So they have structures, these spicules, that bring in sunlight to other organisms so that other organisms can carry out photosynthesis, which is a pretty cool kind of feat there. So that's it for our sponges. Let me know if you have any questions.